So, hello. Welcome to my talk on the diary of a woman in tech. A bit about me, I'm Sarah Persov. I'm an engineering team lead at Dojo, and I'm also the head of women in tech at Dojo. My history is very much software engineering, computer science. I've dabbled in a bit of DevOps, platform engineering, but critically, I'm a software engineer at heart. My day-to-day job is both people management, technical team lead, and spending time investigating what are the issues that women are actually experiencing that is causing them to leave this industry. In today's talk, I'm going to be talking about what women are actually experiencing. And I know this is a predominantly female audience, but I think it's really important that everyone is on a level playing field to understand what is actually contributing to up to 45% of women in tech leaving within the first 8 years. Every woman is going to experience different things, but the key thing is that there's a rhythm and a beat that most women in tech have at least experienced to some degree. I'm also going to be talking about why you should care and why a business should care, because it's very easy to just view women in technology and DEI as a tick boxing exercise, but there are legitimate reasons why businesses should put a focus on having truly diverse teams. And finally, I'm going to be talking a bit about what you can do to make a difference, both as individuals and as a company. Now, what are women actually experiencing? As I mentioned, there was a shocking statistic that was released earlier this year that up to 45% of women who enter the tech industry leave it within the first 8 years or by the age of 35. This is up to a 50% higher amount than men leaving the industry. As I also mentioned, I've spent a lot of time actually working on finding out what is causing this, talking to women confidentially, aggregating the different anecdotal data, and then anonymizing it. In my day-to-day job, this is then used to help shape incentives and vision within the company to help equalize women in tech. But also, I spend a lot of time not just within the company, but going to events like this, roundtables, talking to women on LinkedIn, talking to women all the time, trying to genuinely find out what women at all stages of their career are facing. Because women who are early in their career statistically face incredibly different things than women further along in their career. Now, I think one of the biggest things is that there's been a normalization of subtle or low-level discrimination. Very much the type of thing that you cannot call out, and that's going to be a theme throughout. What that really means, though, is the little comments that bother us, the little kind of remarks of, oh, well, women are better organizers, the assumption that women should be the ones taking the notes, things like that. It's this normalization of gender roles that are being applied to women unfairly. The next big thing is double standards. So, what I found both anecdotally and through statistics online, women are held to a completely different standard to men, especially within interview stages. And what that actually then means is that it's actually incredibly rare to hear of an average woman in tech, an average software engineer, an average tester, an average product manager. Often they're considered superstars or Wonder Woman. They're not given the grace and allowance to fail in a way that they can grow from. They're not given the same, I guess, playing field. And I use that a lot because it's a really critical thing. When women are being held to such a different standard, such as the expectation that they can do everything without any help, that they can just soar, that just doing their job isn't considered good enough. They have to be doing even more than that. Whereas male colleagues, it's good enough. Just doing their tickets is good enough. Doing it in the set time frame is good enough. Women are expected to do it quicker, better, more thoroughly researched, more testing, more everything. And that really is due to the lack of representation of women in tech at all levels. But particularly the fact that there are a lot more women at a junior level in tech than further along in their career really confirms this to people. And what ends up happening is that every woman is the token woman in tech. The amount of times I've been doing sessions with male colleagues, VPs, execs, not just within Dojo, where I point out, well, women aren't being given the same grace, women aren't being given the same allowance. They go, oh, well, you know, I once worked with a woman and she wasn't good enough. And that then becomes the default thought of thinking about women in tech. And it then gets really compounded with the fact that due to the push for, you know, diversity within all industries, but particularly tech, women are then also considered only, you know, there for positive discrimination. You're only there to look good. And what that then trickles down to is this way that you're treated by both your peers and management. Even if that manager may have hired you, there's still this kind of underlying, you know, comments, these small things of, well, you look great for this advert, you know, oh, we're doing an event, let's get you up there because, you know, you're a woman. But it entirely dismisses the expertise and experience that women have and can bring. Because if they're only there because of positive discrimination, then they're not there for their expertise, they're not there for their job. And that really then leads to a lack of respect. And it's on all levels. I'm a big believer that stuff like this is a giant trickle down. If you have a manager that is subconsciously, and a lot of the time this behaviour isn't done consciously, it's not overt, it's not something you can just call out, right? And if that manager is subconsciously treating you differently, then your male peers and colleagues are going to follow suit. At the end of the day, people don't behave in a way that's going against what their manager is showcasing, because then it can affect your career progression, right? So when you have management who are normalizing this, then especially men, but women as well, will copy that behavior. A really big example of this, in especially software engineering, is stand-up or daily check-ins. And something I've heard time and time again from lots of different women, not just in the UK, all over the world, from all types of companies, is that during stand-up, the tone that is used with them is entirely different. It isn't, how are you doing with your stuff? Do you need any help? You know, should I set you up with a project manager? You know, why don't we go through the requirements again? It's, why aren't you getting it done fast enough? You know, the deadline's in 3 days. Where's the code review? There's essentially this tone, this expectation that's set on them that will then bleed into the subconscious of everyone around them. Now, that then has a huge knock-on effect for career progression, especially when it's coined with the fact that social bonding within teams is often done outside of the office. It's things like team lunches, going to the pub after work, playing football on the weekends and the evenings. And a big thing is that at kind of events like this, at those critical bonding moments for teams, women are often accidentally left out. And that's not to say that women can't love football. It's not just football, it's just the easiest kind of go-to example, right? I know I personally have had many experiences where we've gone for a team lunch and everyone is really, really engrossed in a topic that I have no interest in, no experience in. Really, I can't contribute, I can't be part of that bonding. And what this can often look like, let's use football as an example, is for months at a time, every week, every time in the pub after work, every lunch, even when you're chatting after stand-up and going for a coffee or over Zoom, it's talking about the latest matches, talking about fantasy football, talking about things that you can't contribute to. But what that leads to is essentially a deeper understanding of your colleagues. And career progression, especially when it comes to reviews, is equally about the networking that you've done, the connections that you've built, the understanding that you've built within your team and with your colleagues. So, if everyone else in the team is really into football and you're not, and they end up going and doing five-a-side football on the weekend, they end up chatting about it more, that naturally will lead into conversations about their personal life. And when it comes to the review, the manager knows that Bob's having a hard time at the moment and he's in the middle of a divorce, and that means that certain days when he gets his kids, he's not going to be as focused. It means that he knows that Steve is in the middle of, moving house, and we're coming up to completion and he's really distracted. It's these little personal details. And then it gets to you. And all you've had is the normal one-to-ones. You haven't built up that connection, that trust to be able to share your personal life, share more of who you are than just being a software engineer or a woman in tech. And because there's been this different expectation put on you from the get-go, that, niggling, awkward tone, that kind of slightly disappointed that you're not being Wonder Woman at this exact moment, that why aren't you getting it done fast enough? Even though we didn't ask you, the notes you took at that really important meeting, why didn't you write them up quick enough? Why aren't you doing the pastoral care enough? Things that often translate to, you're not, connected to the team. You're not a real team player, because for some reason, often the woman in the team is expected to be the one checking in with people. How are you doing? When a male colleague gets angry, which apparently is not being emotional, anger for men isn't emotional, for women it is obviously emotional, it becomes this weighing up, death by 1,000 paper cuts. You can't call these things out, because when you try to, it's only ever viewed as that snapshot, that one little thing. It's not viewed in context. So it's, it's the review period. And your colleagues are thinking about the last 3 months, last 6 months, and they're thinking about, well, has she been a team player? Well, not really, she doesn't seem that committed when we go for a team lunch. She's really quiet. She doesn't really talk about things we want to talk about. And yeah, her work is fine, but that subconscious impact of whoever's running stand-up having that different expectation has fully penetrated every part of that subconscious. So they don't really review what you've done. They don't review the fantastic work. They don't review the fact that you went above and beyond. They forget about all those little things that you do, because to them, they're irrelevant, unless you stop doing them, and then they're apparently incredibly relevant. So, you really want to get promoted. You've been at this level for a while. You know that you're achieving. You know that you're performing at a high level, but your manager isn't going to put you forward for that. The reflections from your teammates aren't going to show that progression. They're not going to show how well you've been doing, because all of these little things combined have led to this warped view of your performance, of who you are. And if you're a parent, that's even harder. Now, I will say I'm not currently a parent, but I've put a lot of effort into really understanding how that does affect women. And the biggest thing is that even if you're working remotely or you're hybrid, women are still considered the default parent, the de facto parent. And that can have a huge knock-on effect. oh, it's half term, I'm going to have to work remotely this week, I might be a bit distracted. Now, it doesn't matter that your male colleagues are also parents, they're not viewed first and foremost as a parent. They happen to have kids. Whereas women are often viewed as a parent or a mother, then a woman, then a woman in tech. And that can make it incredibly difficult to actually progress, to actually get the buy-in from your manager, because they have unknowingly often iced you out. There are a lot of other things here. This is not that long at all. There's a lot of evidence, for example, that women will only apply to a role if they meet roughly 80% of the criteria. Men, it's 30%. And what that then means is that women aren't getting into the roles they should be in because, they come across almost overqualified. It's just, you're overqualified, but we're setting these judgments against you that we're not necessarily aware of during your interview. And then that makes it even harder. There are so many things that ultimately lead to women leaving. Women, gaining that self-confidence, overcoming that imposter syndrome, overcoming the constant, small, nicking away at who they are. And I've also heard from a lot of women that, especially once they have kids, and their kids are at an age where they're developing a personality, and you've had a really bad day at work, and you come home, and you go, I wouldn't want my kid to be treated that way. Why am I letting myself be treated that way? And considering the significant amount of women entering the tech industry start with imposter syndrome, it's not a surprise that they're not starting with that confidence or support network to push back. This is obviously a huge problem for the tech industry. It's a huge problem for STEM. It's a huge problem for business. And I often get asked, it's not great, is it? It's unfortunate, but why should we care as a business? Okay, we want to look good. We're going to say that we're, doing all these DEI things. We're going to say that we care about women in tech. But ultimately, a lot of the time, businesses think it's just for appearances. But research has proven time and time again, the more diverse your team is, the more experiences they have, the more varied backgrounds, not having a single demographic means that they build much better products. A big example of this is almost all health apps and period tracking. There was a huge app that came out, I think in 2017, that they clearly put a lot of money in wiping from the internet, where when they published it, it assumed that all women had a period of just 28 days, because that's what Google said. Now, apparently, none of these men had ever, paid any attention to women in their life, or thought to ask, but that was a huge catastrophe for them. You might be thinking, well, that was a while ago. It isn't. Even apps coming out at the moment don't allow people to actually have flexible ways of tracking their periods, tracking their pain, being able to build up those patterns to help. Now, another big thing is that if you don't have that inclusive environment, women will leave. Now, that's not to say if you're a small company or you're a company that's realised you have an imbalance that you shouldn't work on that and you should just give up. But the truth is that the more representation there is, the more comfortable women will be. The more they're going to feel like they do have room for career progression, that they're heard, that they're not just there for appearances and as a token. And what that also means is that the more women there are, the more women will come, because they'll have interview processes where there's actually a female engineer. They'll have interview processes where they can actually identify with someone in their interview process. And that comforts them, because ultimately, if you've made the brave decision to leave a company, especially due to sexism, not that you can call it sexism, because that, scares people, but ultimately that's what it is, then you're not going to want to go somewhere that you're just going to be, repeating the pattern. And ultimately, as individuals, we all want to be a better person, I hope. We all want to grow, we all want to evolve. Tech, in particular, but STEM in general, is an incredibly fast-paced industry. We're constantly evolving, innovating, changing things up. So why is it that businesses don't understand that they need to also innovate, grow, evolve? That society is changing constantly and in a fast-paced way. They need to keep up with that. Otherwise, what they're going to be building isn't going to be actually suitable for a large amount of the population. They're not going to be taking into account different minorities if they don't have any minorities on that product. And yes, you can do research. Yes, you can go and do Q&A. You can try and figure out your requirements. But that's incredibly different than actually having someone who's experienced that. And an example I often use with this is the way that comms are sent out by all companies. Did you know that most screen readers for visually impaired people cannot read normal emails because they're built in HTML and CSS, and they're not built in with, naturally, the plain text version? Businesses need to actually actively set that up, either in, third-party products for sending out comms, or if they're building their own internal one. Something as small as that can make a huge difference on the experience people have using your product. And ultimately, you want a good experience. That's going to have repeat business. That's going to improve it. That's going to ultimately bring more money in to the business. Now, you might be thinking this is all doom and gloom. It isn't, I promise. Things are changing at an incredible pace. Events such as these are growing, with more and more women here than last year, for example. Businesses are starting to actually realise this matters. And it really isn't all doom and gloom. Just in the last year, the amount of growth the tech and STEM industry has had in general has been staggering. But that doesn't mean that every single person here can't make a difference. It might be just asking your female colleagues in a different team or in a different structure in the company, or if you're a software engineer, asking product. It's all about finding people who have different experiences than you and finding out how are they actually doing. Because their experiences might be vastly different to yours. It might be that actually they are a woman who's further along in their career, and because they're not considered as young by male colleagues, they're automatically given more respect, but the younger women in their teams aren't. It might be that actually they've got a much higher representation of women, and the trickle-down effect has meant that they have a fantastic time. They don't feel any sexism, they don't feel anything to call out. But on the flip side, you might be that woman who doesn't think that there's anything wrong. And every business will have pockets, individuals who cause problems that have a domino effect. Another big thing is if you're in a position of privilege, actually calling people out. And that doesn't mean in a room of 10 people going, hey, you're being a dick. It means taking them after the meeting, making a note of it, finding some time that you can privately talk to them about it and say, I know you didn't mean to do it this way. You have to come in a non-attacking way, because people will feel defensive naturally when they realise that they've negatively impacted someone. And lastly, frequent self-reflection. Every single one of us can do better in all aspects. We can all be more inclusive. We can all, not realise that there's something that's changed in society that we've missed. But this is a type of thing where it's not, every 6 months we have a DEI day at work, I'm going to now think. It needs to be a thing that you build into your routine. Put time in a calendar. You know, actually have dedicated time to build this up so that it becomes habit instead of just being, you know, something you're randomly reminded to do. And ultimately, as women, it's about building up that community, building up that support network, especially for women who will be more vulnerable, who will be scared to call things out, who will be scared that their job is on the line if they say that their manager's not treating them right. And helping them, learning from other people's experiences is critical on actual change. Now, I know I've spoken a lot, and I know that, you know, a lot of the things that I've brought up here, I'm barely touching on. If you do want to get in touch, please contact me on LinkedIn. We also have a stand right in front of the keynote speaker stage for Dojo, so please come on by. We're actively, you know, hiring at the moment, and you can also come and have a chat. It's really important that as women, we build each other up and support each other. By the way, we're at stand B75. I'm now going to hand over for Q&A, and I believe the lovely woman at the back there has a microphone if anyone does have any questions.